I'm standing here with Mattias Goldmann, CEO at the Green and Liberal think tank Ferries with the 2030 Secretariat. So Mattias, tell me, what are Sweden's 2030 transport goals and what is 2030 Secretariat?
Well, in Sweden we have 8 parties in parliament, and out of these 8 parties, 7 parties have agreed that by the year 2030 Sweden is going to have a fossil independent transport sector, which translates into reducing the CO2 emissions from transport by 70%. And with transport we don't just mean new cars, we mean everything that's on the road, and actually we now also include shipping. We're now on an electric boat, so that's part of it. And at the 2030 Secretariat we sort of a coalition of the willing that said let's do this. So there's automobile manufacturers, there's 36 municipalities, there's trade organizations, so many who say, well, this is a tremendous business opportunity and this is a chance for Sweden to really be relevant way beyond our borders. Because when we look at the United Nations climate negotiations, we see that roughly 70% of all the world's countries also want to change their transport sector into more efficient and less fuel fossil dependent. So when Sweden is leading the way there, we're really relevant for the world.
Okay, so what support are you offering and what seems to have been most useful for practitioners?
Well, that's a great question, and we find out that many people need the shining example. They need to see that, yes, in Sweden and in Stockholm we take household waste, we turn it into biogas, we run our buses on that. We see that in Sweden we're now moving from diesel-powered ferries to electric ferries. Those kind of concrete examples on what's really happening on the ground is what really moves things. It's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to prove that it is really happening. Where we haven't really seen as much things happening as yet is the behavioral change, where, for instance, we should perhaps, instead of commuting, we should work from home. That's where we still need to tap into the tremendous resources that we have within the Swedish IT sector.
Interesting. So on to some more specific questions. Are you exploring and encouraging shared vehicles as a strategy?
I think that's very important. In Sweden we have roughly 5 million vehicles, 4 million passenger cars. Most of them on average are used less than 1 hour a day. That's 95% non-usage. So many people think that I need access to a vehicle, but do I really need to own a vehicle? So that kind of shared mobility or mobility as a service is definitely coming for cars. We see it with shared bike systems, and we see how that moves into new spheres of the transport sector all the time.
So what is the role for alternative fuels and electrification?
First of all, when we start discussing fossil independent transport sector, when the media is trying to frame that, it's often a picture of an electric car. Electric cars are great, but of the whole transport sector, really only 7% are new car sales. The rest is what's already on the road. And we know that a fossil fuel can easily be changed to a renewable fuel. Switching to electricity is not going to be so easy. Trucks that are in Sweden today and maybe in Poland on Tuesday and in Portugal next week need to run on a fuel that they can use in many different countries. That's why renewable biofuels are so important. The producers in Sweden have CO2 emissions reductions with 80 to 90% when we do the biofuels really well. We know that that compares very well to many other countries where biofuels have not been produced in such a sustainable way.
Interesting. So, in your opinion, in what particular ways should cities and transport agencies be getting ready?
I think we're now moving beyond getting ready. I think it's now time to really start to act, and we see that the cities are the main drivers here. Often it's not actually for climate, but it's for local air quality, where we see that, for instance, many big Chinese cities realize that their citizens are not interested in staying and making a career in Beijing or Shanghai unless air quality improves. So the cities have a key role here. The cities also have the planning monopoly in most cities, so they decide what gets to go where. They can say, well, in the inner city we're not even going to allow fossil fuel powered vehicles anymore. The cities are often big procurers. They buy a lot of vehicles, so when they decide to start a market just by saying, well, the city ourselves, we're not going to have any fossil cars, so we're going to switch to biking, they create a market that somebody needs to kickstart.
So standing here on the world's fastest battery-driven ferry.
It's amazing, it was so fun.
Yes. What about shipping and ferries?
Shipping and ferries has often been overlooked, and they have also been slow in global terms to join the bandwagon. In Sweden, when we decided we're going to have a fossil independent transport sector, the shipping sector voluntarily said, well, we also want to be part of the solution. So a lot of things are happening there, and also we see that there's simply too much traffic on many of our roads. So for instance, here in Stockholm, with several hundred inhabited islands, it would be a great thing if a lot of the transport could move from car and bus to ferries such as this.
That's interesting. So what sort of feedback are you getting from practitioners that you work with, and what are their main obstacles?
Well, the main feedback is amazing. There's been the COP climate meetings in Lima, in Paris, and now in Marrakesh. We are asked to present to the world how Sweden is leading the way in the switch from fossil to renewable energy efficient transports and the switch of transport mode. The practitioners, including truck makers like Scania, they say, well, Sweden is a small market. It's not even relevant for us as manufacturers unless it's a test market for new technology. So we see that global players are really coming to Sweden because they know that what's happening here first is then going to happen at so many other markets. So it's really super exciting to be part of it, and we can really be on the world's first super fast ferry as well. So yeah, it's kicking.
Wonderful. When it comes to setting up platforms to support the transition around the world, what suggestions or recommendations do you have?
Well, that's often going to be localized. Every city has its own reality and its own history and its own political scene. But I'd like for us to go from the diamond shape to the hourglass shape. Now, the hourglass is big at the bottom and big at the top. The bottom is the sort of day-to-day normal work that we all do, and where all citizens need to see that something is changing. We're moving from the non-sustainable to the sustainable and renewable. And then in the middle, those things are perhaps not so important. Somebody else can deal with them. And at the top, we got the big global issues where we are demanding from our companies, where we purchase our stuff and how we transport us, we demand that they be part of those global solutions. There's the climate problem. We now have 17 global sustainability goals that we all need to be part of. So let's work with the hourglass.
Thank you so much, Mattias.
Thank you so much, everyone out there.